The tall glass doors of the grand corporate building opened and closed throughout the morning as employees in press suits hurried inside, each one aware that the day was unlike any ordinary day. The entire office was buzzing with whispers about the arrival of a powerful guest. He was not just any visitor. He was an era billionaire whose name carried weight in every major business hub across the world. His presence alone was enough to make seasoned executives nervous, and his decisions could shape the fate of entire companies. Everyone had been told to be on their best behavior, and nothing was to go wrong. Yet, as often happens in life, the most unexpected twist was waiting quietly in the corner, hidden from the eyes of those who thought they understood how the world worked. Inside the shiny lobby, workers stood straighter, adjusted their ties, and greeted each other with forced politeness, their eyes constantly drifting toward the entrance as if the billionaire could arrive any second. The receptionists kept rehearsing their smiles, trying to strike a balance between warmth and professionalism. Security guards patrolled with extra alertness, scanning every corner as if perfection could be achieved by controlling every tiny detail. But even in all that rush, one man moved slowly and steadily, pushing a mop bucket across the marble floor. He was a janitor, an older black man with tired eyes that spoke of long days and silent struggles. His uniform was faded, his shoes worn, and in the sea of expensive suits, he was invisible. Few greeted him, and some avoided looking at him altogether, as if acknowledging his presence would disturb the careful picture of wealth and success they wanted to display. He worked silently, bending to clean a faint streak on the floor that no one else noticed. To him, every corner mattered, every spot needed attention, but no one paused to thank him. They brushed past him as though he were part of the furniture, his existence reduced to a background role in the shiny story they were trying to present to their guest. What none of them knew was that this quiet janitor carried stories, knowledge, and experiences far beyond what his uniform suggested. Life had shaped him in ways more powerful than any degree or expensive title could, and soon that hidden truth would come to light in a way that no one expected. The billionaire's arrival was sudden. Dark luxury cars lined up outside, and the atmosphere changed instantly. Executives rushed to their positions, waiting to greet him, their rehearsed smiles ready, their voices polite but trembling. The man himself stepped out, tall, sharply dressed, his expression calm but commanding. His eyes scanned the building with the sharpness of someone used to measuring people within seconds. He didn't waste words, and his silence made everyone even more uneasy. He had come with hopes of exploring a deal, but his time was valuable, and any sign of arrogance or disrespect could make him walk away without hesitation. Inside, conversations paused as he entered, every employee suddenly aware of their posture, their words, their importance being silently weighed. The executives guided him through the building, showing off polished meeting rooms, discussing numbers and potential opportunities. Yet, beneath their confident tones, a nervousness lingered. They wanted to impress him, but the truth was, they had little understanding of his culture, his values, or the quiet dignity with which he lived his life. To them, he was a prize to be won, not a person to be respected. The janitor continued his work in the background, moving along the edges of the hallways, his head lowered, listening but never speaking. He heard the rushed conversations, the exaggerated claims, and the eagerness in the executives' voices as they tried to persuade the billionaire of their worth. But the billionaire's face remained unmoved. His silence spoke louder than their words, and with each passing moment, it became clear he was not impressed. A subtle frown formed on his face, and those who noticed began to panic inside. If he left now, the entire deal would crumble. As he walked toward the exit, tension spread like wildfire. Executives exchanged nervous glances, one whispering urgently to another about trying harder, another hurrying to fetch documents that might change his mind. But his steps were steady, deliberate, and final. He was leaving, unimpressed and perhaps even offended by the arrogance he had quietly observed. All their efforts, their polished presentations, and their empty smiles had failed to touch him. The doors ahead seemed ready to close behind him, and with them, the last chance of saving their dream deal. And then, in that very moment of silence when the entire office held its breath, a voice rose unexpectedly. It was not the voice of a polished executive or a trained negotiator. It was a quiet, steady voice of the janitor, who had been invisible until now. His words flowed in perfect Arabic, clear and confident, carrying not only the beauty of the language but the weight of deep respect and sincerity. The billionaire froze mid-step. The sound of his mother tongue, spoken so fluently and naturally, cut through the polished lies and empty gestures of the executives. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing not in anger but in surprise. Who was this man, this janitor in a faded uniform, who had just spoken to him in a way none of the polished suits could? In that moment, time seemed to pause. The executives stared in disbelief, unable to understand what had just happened. The man they had ignored, dismissed, and overlooked had suddenly become the center of attention. The billionaire's gaze lingered on the janitor, studying him deeply, as if searching for answers in his eyes. The janitor didn't flinch, didn't look away. He stood with quiet strength, his voice steady, his presence undeniable. For the first time that day, the billionaire's expression softened, touched by something far greater than wealth or titles. He was touched by truth, humility, and a reminder of the respect that transcends status. That moment, simple yet powerful, was the beginning of a story that no one in that building would ever forget. It was a spark that would unravel arrogance, expose prejudice, and reveal the hidden strength of a man who had been invisible for too long. The janitor's words in Arabic were not just a language. They were a bridge between two worlds, a reminder that dignity cannot be measured by uniforms or positions, but only by the heart and the courage to speak when it matters most. The billionaire's gaze lingered on the janitor for longer than anyone expected, but he did not say anything. His sharp eyes softened only for a moment before he turned his head and began walking again, though slower this time, as if his mind was still replaying those unexpected words he had heard. The executives exhaled heavily in relief, though they still did not understand what had just taken place. To them, the janitor's presence was nothing but a distraction. Yet, hidden beneath their polished smiles, there was a hint of uneasiness, a silent fear that something they could not control had entered the room. The janitor, however, did not look at anyone else. He returned to his work as if nothing unusual had happened, dipping the mop into the bucket and slowly wiping the marble floor that already gleamed. To him, work was not about recognition, but about discipline. Every line he made with his mop was straight. Every corner was cleaned with care, and though his body ached with age, his movements carried a quiet dignity. He had no expensive suit, no shiny shoes, and no grand title, but he had something far more valuable: patience, humility, and wisdom earned through years of surviving struggles no one else in that building could imagine. The office itself was buzzing with tension. Behind the scenes, teams of assistants rushed to prepare documents, fix errors in presentations, and update last-minute reports that would probably never be read. Secretaries whispered urgently on phones, passing information from one office to another, while managers paced in circles rehearsing their next lines. The building, from the shining reception to the top-floor boardroom, was like a stage where every actor had one goal: to impress the billionaire. Yet, in all this frantic effort, the one man who had not been rehearsed, who had not been asked to play any role, was the janitor. He remained invisible, moving silently through the background, yet his single act had already made more impact than all the rehearsed gestures combined. The billionaire was known across continents as a man who valued respect above everything. He had grown up in a land where family, honor, and language were deeply tied to identity. To him, words were not just sounds. They carried history, tradition, and the soul of a people. That was why hearing his language spoken so fluently by someone completely unexpected touched him in a way the executives could not understand. He had spent years watching wealthy men flatter him, powerful leaders trying to bend his decisions, and corporations treating him like a prize to be won. But rarely had he found sincerity. Rarely had he seen humility that was not a mask for ambition. That morning, for the first time in many months, he had caught a glimpse of something real. On the other side of the building, the janitor continued to move through the corridors, unnoticed once again. His story was not written on his uniform, but it was written in the tired lines on his face and in the wisdom that sparkled faintly in his eyes. Once, many years ago, he had been a student with dreams larger than life. He had studied languages passionately, fascinated by the way words could connect people across oceans and cultures. He had even spent time living abroad, where he learned Arabic not just as a language, but as a key to understanding another world. He had read poetry, memorized phrases, and carried conversations with travelers who found comfort in his ability to speak their tongue. But life is not always kind, and somewhere along the way, hardship had forced him into silence. He took on the role of a janitor, not because it reflected his ability, but because it provided stability, food on the table, and dignity through honest work. The executives never cared to know this. To them, he was simply the cleaner, a man whose job was to keep their shoes from touching dirty floors. They never asked him questions, never bothered to know the person behind the uniform. They saw his bent back, but not the strength it carried. They noticed his quietness, but never guessed the depth of knowledge hidden behind it. They assumed his silence was emptiness, when in reality, his silence was wisdom. Meanwhile, in the meeting rooms, the executives were scrambling. They spoke in fast voices, pulling out charts, explaining profits, predicting growth, trying everything to capture the billionaire's interest. But no matter how many slides they presented, his expression barely changed. His mind had already decided. He had seen arrogance masked as confidence, desperation disguised as ambition. He did not see respect, and without respect, no deal was worth his time. His life had taught him that money could buy many things, but it could never buy dignity. And so, he prepared himself to leave. The janitor's day was filled with tasks no one noticed: emptying trash bins, wiping tables, polishing glass windows. As he worked, he overheard fragments of conversations. He listened not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. He had seen this pattern many times. People chasing wealth, forgetting kindness, climbing ladders built on pride. He shook his head gently, remembering his own journey, how he had once believed that recognition was the key to success. But now he knew better. Respect, kindness, and humility were the true treasures of life, and no uniform could take them away from him. As the billionaire walked past the reception again, the executives trailing behind him with nervous chatter, the janitor stood at the far end of the hall, mop in hand. His eyes followed the tall figure with calmness, not curiosity. He had no desire to impress, no need to perform. Yet something within him stirred, a quiet courage that told him to speak. Perhaps it was the way the executives had treated the billionaire, all words but no soul. Perhaps it was the way the billionaire's face seemed heavy with disappointment. Or perhaps it was simply fate. When the janitor's voice rose in fluent Arabic, it was not planned. It was as natural as breathing, as effortless as a memory returning to life. His words were respectful, simple, and true. They spoke of welcome, of dignity, of recognition that went beyond money. They were words that acknowledged not the billionaire's wealth, but his humanity. The billionaire stopped, his steps halting in disbelief. In that pause, the entire office seemed to freeze. The sound of keyboards stopped, the whispers fell silent, and every eye turned to man they had ignored for years. The janitor did not lift his chin arrogantly. He stood humbly, his eyes soft, his hands still holding the mop. His voice had spoken what his soul carried, respect without expectation. The billionaire's heart stirred in a way it had not for a long time. The janitor's words had reminded him of his own home, of streets where elders shared wisdom freely, of a culture where greetings were sacred and sincerity mattered more than gold. He turned slowly, studying the janitor carefully. The executives looked at one another, confused, embarrassed, even afraid. For the first time, the spotlight was not on them but on the man they had overlooked. This moment was only the beginning. The story of the janitor and the billionaire was not about wealth, nor about position. It was about dignity that cannot be erased, about hidden worth that shines at the right time. Life had chosen this moment to reveal what pride could never see, and everyone in that building was about to witness a lesson they would never forget. The silence that followed the janitor's words was heavier than anything that had been spoken in the grand office that morning. For a few seconds, no one moved. The billionaire stood still, his sharp eyes fixed on a man with the mop in his hands. The executives froze too, their polished smiles cracking into nervous expressions. They could not believe what they had just witnessed. The janitor, whom they never once thought important enough to acknowledge, had just spoken in flawless Arabic, words that carried warmth, dignity, and truth. The billionaire's expression was hard to read, but his stillness was powerful. Everyone around him knew that something inside him had shifted. He had been ready to leave, to end this business meeting and walk away without a second thought. Yet those unexpected words, spoken in his own language, reached deeper than the numbers and promises thrown at him all morning. He did not say anything right away, but the fact that he stopped was enough to shake the room. The executives exchanged nervous glances. They whispered among themselves, some angry, some confused. To them, the janitor's action felt like an interruption, something that might ruin their last chance of saving the deal. One of them muttered under his breath, "What is he doing? He should know his place." Another one tried to regain control by quickly stepping forward and speaking louder, hoping to draw the billionaire's attention back to the glossy folders in his hands. But it was too late. The billionaire's gaze never left the janitor. The janitor, however, did not try to explain or defend himself. He had not spoken to gain attention, nor to impress anyone. He had spoken because something inside him could not remain silent. All his life he had seen people misjudge others, assuming that dignity could only be found in wealth, that intelligence could only wear expensive suits. And in that moment, as he watched the billionaire being treated like an object of wealth instead of a man of honor, he felt compelled to show respect in the only way he knew how, through language, through sincerity, through a voice that came from his heart. The billionaire finally moved. He turned fully to face the janitor, his eyes narrowing not with anger but with curiosity. It was rare for him to be surprised, yet here he was, caught off guard by someone no one else valued. The executives held their breath, waiting to see if he would walk away again. But instead of leaving, he took a slow step closer, studying the janitor the way one studies something precious yet unexpected. His silence now carried a different weight, not rejection, but attention. Around them, the atmosphere was changing. The staff, who had been so focused on impressing the billionaire, now shifted uncomfortably. Their arrogance felt exposed, their hurried words meaningless compared to the janitor's simple greeting. Some avoided looking at him, ashamed to realize how invisible they had made him feel for so long. Others looked at him with disbelief, as if struggling to accept that someone they dismissed daily could hold such hidden knowledge. The janitor lowered his eyes slightly, not out of fear, but humility. He returned to his mop, as if reminding himself that his job was to serve quietly. Yet his silence spoke louder now, his presence impossible to ignore. He had changed the balance of the room, and though he acted as if nothing had happened, everyone could feel the shift. The executives, desperate to salvage control, hurried to speak again. They pulled out more figures, charts, and graphs, raising their voices as if volume could drown out the memory of the janitor's words. But the billionaire did not look at their papers. He was no longer listening to them. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the janitor, on the unexpected dignity that had appeared before him. He had traveled across countries, met kings and presidents, spoken to the wealthiest of the wealthy. Yet it was this quiet man in a faded uniform who had touched him in a way no one else could. Whispers spread through the building. Assistants told others what had happened. And soon even those who had not been in the lobby were peeking through doors and corridors, trying to catch a glimpse of the man who had stunned the billionaire. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with resentment. For those who had mistreated him, the shame burned quietly inside. They remembered the times they had spoken down to him, ignored him, or laughed at his silence. Now they realized that behind that silence was strength greater than their own empty words. The billionaire began asking quiet questions to his translator and aides, but his eyes never left the janitor. He wanted to know who this man was, how he spoke Arabic so fluently, and why he was working in such position. The executive stammered, caught off guard, unsure what to say. They had never once cared enough to ask about the janitor's life, and now their ignorance was exposed. They shuffled nervously, embarrassed by their lack of answers. The janitor's story was simple yet powerful. Many years earlier, he had studied languages with passion. He had believed that communication was the bridge between hearts, that understanding one another's culture was the key to respect. He had lived in neighborhoods where Arabic was spoken, learning from friends, teachers, and neighbors. He had worked hard, but life had taken unexpected turns. Family struggles, financial hardships, and responsibilities that forced him to leave behind bigger dreams. Yet, through all of it, he never let go of his knowledge. It was a part of him, even if the world chose not to see it. As the day unfolded, the executives' attempts to distract the billionaire grew weaker. Their numbers no longer mattered. Their polished English phrases, rehearsed with so much effort, sounded hollow compared to the janitor's natural words respect. The billionaire remained calm, his presence even stronger than before. He had not decided what he would do yet, but everyone could see that the choice now rested on something deeper than contracts or money. The janitor returned to his routine, emptying bins, wiping tables, moving quietly as he always had. Yet now every step he took was watched by eyes that had once ignored him. He did not bask in the attention, nor did he act differently. His humility remained the same. For him, nothing had changed. He was still the janitor, still doing his duty with care. But for everyone else, everything had changed. They could no longer look at him and see just a janitor. They saw the man who had stopped the billionaire in his tracks with nothing but words spoken from the heart. As the hours passed, the tension in the building grew heavier. The staff whispered about what the billionaire might decide. Would he leave anyway, unimpressed by the desperate efforts of the executives? Or would he stay, intrigued by the janitor's sincerity? The uncertainty made every second feel longer, and the executives grew more restless, snapping at assistants, blaming one another, trying to shift responsibility for their failures. Yet deep down, they all knew the truth. They had failed to understand the one thing the janitor had shown with ease: respect. In that building filled with glass walls, shiny floors, and loud promises, the quiet janitor had become the most important person of all. And though he never sought the spotlight, life had placed it on him. His story was unfolding in front of those who least expected it, and the lessons waiting to be revealed would leave no one unchanged. The day had reached a point where tension was so thick that even the air in the building felt heavy. Every person working in that office could sense that something unusual was unfolding, something that had never happened before in their carefully controlled world. The Arab billionaire, who had been so ready to leave without a second thought, now lingered in the building, his sharp gaze fixed on the janitor who had spoken to him in flawless Arabic. It was not just the words that caught his attention, but the sincerity with which they had been spoken. For years, he had been surrounded by people who tried to impress him, people who wanted his money, his approval, his signature on contracts. Yet here stood a man with no agenda, no polished presentation, no title, and no suit, whose single act of respect had struck deeper than any deal ever could. The executives grew restless. They could see their power slipping from their hands, and for the first time, their control over the situation was gone. They had built their confidence on belief that they were the ones who mattered most in the room, that the billionaire would bend his decisions based on their glossy reports and perfect words. Now all of that seemed meaningless. The eyes of the most powerful man present were no longer on them. They were on someone they had dismissed every day without a second thought. The janitor did not bask in the attention. He did not even lift his chin in pride. Instead, he continued his work, wiping the same spotless floors with quiet focus, as though the weight of the moment did not belong to him. His calmness was unsettling to those who were watching. It was as if he knew something they didn't, as if life had taught him truths that no amount of education or wealth could replace. Finally, the billionaire took a step toward him. The sound of his shoes against a marble floor echoed across the silent lobby. Each step was slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority, but also curiosity. The executives' hearts raced. They wanted to intervene, to speak, to somehow redirect his attention back to them. But no words came out. They knew anything they said now would only make things worse. The janitor looked up, his eyes meeting the billionaire's. For a moment, the entire building felt frozen in time. It was not a meeting of wealth and poverty, nor of power and weakness. It was a meeting of two men, stripped of titles, connected by language and a deeper respect for truth. The billionaire's eyes, which had often been guarded and unreadable, now revealed a flicker of emotion, something softer, more human. It was a look of someone who had finally been seen in a way that went beyond wealth and status. In that stillness, the janitor spoke again, his voice calm and steady. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that could not be ignored. He spoke of respect, of dignity, of the value of recognizing every human being regardless of their role. He reminded the billionaire traditions that both of them understood deeply. Traditions where elders were respected, where kindness was strength, where humility was not weakness but greatness. His words were not rehearsed or polished, but they were alive, born out of lived experience. The billionaire listened intently. Each word struck something within him, pulling memories of his own past. He thought of his childhood, of evenings spent in his home where elders taught him lessons about humility, respect, and honor. He remembered how his father had often said, "The value of a man is not in the clothes he wears, but in the truth he carries." For so long, he had carried those words, but in the noise of business and the rush of the world, they had begun to fade. Now, in this moment, spoken by someone society called a janitor, those truths returned to him with greater power than ever. The executives shifted nervously in the background. Some tried to whisper excuses, hoping to explain away the situation. But no matter how hard they tried, their voices felt small, unimportant, almost embarrassing the shadow of the janitor's quiet dignity. They realized that the very man they had looked down on had done what none of them could. He had touched the heart of the billionaire. For the billionaire, this moment was more than surprising. It was humbling. Here was a man with no wealth, no position, no recognition. Yet he carried himself with more dignity than all the suited executives combined. The realization was powerful, almost overwhelming. He turned to glance at the executives, and his sharp eyes revealed his disappointment. He had come looking for respect, sincerity, and understanding. Instead, he had found arrogance, greed, and ignorance. The only true respect he had felt all day had come from the janitor. The atmosphere in the building shifted dramatically. Those who had once felt superior now looked down in shame. They remembered how they had brushed past the janitor, how they had failed to greet him, how they had spoken about him without care. Now, standing in front of the billionaire, they wished they could erase those moments. But it was too late. Their actions had already exposed them. The billionaire's silence grew heavy again, but this time it was not a silence of rejection. It was the silence of reflection, the silence of a man rethinking everything he had witnessed. The janitor stood quietly, not asking for recognition, not demanding respect, simply being himself. And in that stillness, the most powerful man in the room saw a truth that no business deal could teach. True strength is often hidden in those the world overlooks. Finally, the billionaire broke his silence. He did not raise his voice, nor did he deliver a long speech. Instead, he spoke in a calm, clear tone, his words carrying the authority of someone who had made up his mind. He acknowledged the janitor, recognizing his dignity and thanking him in front of everyone. The sound of gratitude from the billionaire's lips was enough to shake the room. No executive had expected this outcome. They stood in stunned silence, their carefully planned strategies falling apart like fragile glass. The janitor bowed his head slightly in humility, then returned to his mop. He did not celebrate, did not boast, did not demand more. He was the same man he'd always been, quiet, disciplined, steady. But everyone around him was changed. They saw him differently now. They could no longer hide behind their arrogance, because his actions had exposed their blindness. This was the climax of a story no one had prepared for. A story where the man considered least important became the one who taught the greatest lesson. The billionaire's respect for him would not only change the course of the meeting, but also leave behind a lesson that every person in that building would carry long after the day was over. The room was heavy with emotion, but it was also filled with something rare, truth. In a world that often bowed before wealth, power, and titles, this moment reminded everyone that true greatness could appear in the most unexpected places. The janitor had shown that dignity does not come from position but from character, and respect is not demanded by status, but earned through sincerity. The atmosphere inside the building was no longer the same as it had been that morning. The shiny walls, the expensive furniture, and the polished smiles of the executives suddenly felt small compared to what had just taken place. Everyone knew that something had shifted, something far more important than a business deal. The Arab billionaire, who had come with the intention of leaving after being disappointed by the arrogance of those around him, now stood still, his eyes resting on the janitor who had spoken words of truth in his own language. For a man who had seen wealth in every corner of the world, who had been greeted by leaders and kings, it was humbling to find sincerity in a place where no one expected it. The executives were silent, their faces pale with uneasiness. They tried to stand tall, but the weight of their own behavior was pressing heavily on their shoulders. For years, they had ignored the janitor, brushing past him as though he was invisible, thinking his role was too small to matter. Now they could not escape the truth. They had been blind to the very thing the billionaire valued most: respect, humility, and genuine humanity. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with meaning. He acknowledged the janitor, thanking him not only for the words spoken but for the honesty that came with them. His voice echoed through the hall, carrying more power than any presentation the executives had prepared. His gratitude was not rehearsed, not polished, but it was real. He turned to the executives, his gaze sharp, and reminded them that wealth without respect was empty. A business without humility was fragile. And people who ignored others based on status were already poor, no matter how much money they carried. His words cut through the silence like a knife, leaving everyone shaken. The janitor stood quietly, his head slightly bowed, his mop still in his hand. He did not smile in pride or lift his chin in victory. He remained the same humble man he had always been, grounded and calm. To him, the respect shown by the billionaire was not a prize to celebrate, but a reminder that dignity always finds its way to the surface, no matter how long it is ignored. He knew that life had a way of revealing truths at the right time, and this was one of those moments. The billionaire's decision was clear. He would not walk away. But his choice to stay was not because of the executives or their polished strategies. It was because of the respect he had felt from the janitor, the man who had spoken not with ambition, but with sincerity. He turned back toward the conference room, not out of excitement for the deal, but out of a newfound curiosity. If this company had a man like that within its walls, then perhaps there was something worth saving after all. But he made it clear it was not their presentations or numbers that had changed his mind. It was the janitor. This declaration left the executives speechless. Their world, built on arrogance and polished appearances, had been shaken at its core. They realized that all their efforts, their desperate attempts to impress, had failed. What succeeded was the honesty of a man they had overlooked every day. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others shifted uncomfortably, unable to accept how blind they had been. But no one could deny the truth. News of the moment spread quickly through the building. Employees whispered to one another, retelling the story of how the billionaire had been stopped by a janitor's words. Some were inspired, others embarrassed, but all of them were changed. The sight of the janitor pushing his mop now carried a different weight. He was no longer invisible. He had become a symbol of something greater, a reminder that no human being should ever be judged by their position or their uniform. The billionaire's respect for him did not fade with the day. Even as the formal meetings continued, his eyes occasionally glanced toward the janitor, as if he carried with him a sense of grounding, a reminder of truth in a world full of illusions. And though the executives tried to return to their presentations, their voices lacked the same confidence as before. They knew the spotlight no longer belonged to them. As the day came to an end, the janitor quietly gathered his tools, just as he always did. He moved slowly, carefully, making sure the building was left spotless before night fell. To him, it was another day of honest work, another day where his role mattered even if others never said so. Yet deep down, he knew that this day was different. This day, he had shown the world that respect is no rank, and dignity cannot be hidden forever. The billionaire left the building with a softer expression than the one he had carried when he first arrived. He had been reminded of lessons he once knew, lessons about humility, honor, and the value of seeing beyond appearances. As his car door closed and the convoy pulled away, those who remained in the building stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They knew they would never forget what had happened. The janitor walked home that evening with tired steps, but a calm heart. He did not tell his family what had happened in detail, nor did he boast to neighbors about how he had stunned a billionaire. Instead, he returned home as he always did, sitting down at his small kitchen table, thankful for the simple food before him. To him, the true reward was not recognition, but knowing he had spoken words that mattered words that carried respect, and that those words had touched someone deeply. The story of that day lived on long after the building was locked. Employees told it to new workers. Some shared it with friends, and slowly it spread beyond the office walls. It became more than a business tale. It became a life lesson, a reminder to treat every person with respect, no matter their position, no matter their clothing, no matter their role. The executives who had once carried arrogance in their voices now carried a quiet sense of shame. Some of them began greeting the janitor every morning, realizing they could no longer pretend he was invisible. Others avoided him, embarrassed by the memory of how they had ignored him for years. But no matter what they did, the truth remained. The janitor's dignity had changed the course of everything. And so, the story ended not with numbers or contracts, but with a powerful lesson. A lesson that dignity does not need wealth, that respect does not come from titles, and that the worth of a human being can never be measured by what is seen on the outside. The janitor had shown them all that greatness can come from the most unexpected places, and that humility has the power to silence arrogance. The billionaire's decision to stay was remembered, but what was remembered even more was the reason why. And long after the deal was signed, people continued to ask themselves the same question, a question that lingered like an echo. How many people do we pass by every day, blind to their true worth, blind to the wisdom and dignity they carry in silence? That question was a true ending, and perhaps a true beginning, a reminder to look again, to see deeper, and to never judge a human being by their uniform, but by the strength of their heart.